Police were opening fire on the protest.
I know that freedom of speech is not about revolutions, not about throwing out your corrupt and authoritarian presidents. Freedom is a daily exercise, the daily choice of which side you are taking. And if you are neutral in the situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor.
This is not about statistics. When we talk about 100,000 of displaced people, not statistics. It's human beings. They deserve peace, they deserve dignity. And they only count on people like you.
Human rights activists and dissidents in different parts of the world, they may often feel alone. And HRF is able to bring them together so that they see that the struggle is often a shared one.
Profoundly, humanly, it's about connection.
I need a community of people that have been tortured, have been behind bars, that their home was taken away from them. So I can go to them and I can ask them, I can seek their advice.
We spend a lot of time discussing how we can practically make places safer, get people's stories out, fight the good fight.
Hack North Korea, organized by the Human Rights Foundation, brought 100 engineers, coders, activists, investors, and designers to get information into and possibly out of North Korea, airdropping a different kind of weapon. Knowledge.
You see people who live in free societies actually coming genuinely to see how they can help others also become free in their own societies. And that's an opportunity that I am extremely grateful HFF has given me.
Our brain rewards us for extending our hands towards those in need. Perhaps the answer to the epidemic of anxiety and despair of our age is actually to extend our compassion. The future of freedom is the future of creativity, the future of our tools, the future of social impact, the future of positively affecting 1 billion people.
HRF has become that support system we've been looking for a while.
We're all connected. You are really fighting for humanity. Once we understand that, it's never us and them. It's all of us.
HRF is this extraordinary universal knitting machine that knits us all together.
What we're trying to do is link people throughout the world to know that they can have and make a difference. It's only when we choose to do this and put ourselves from empathy into compassion that we will actually be able to move the powers that be to do something similar.
Greetings. I'm standing in the New York office of the Oslo Freedom Forum at the Human Rights Foundation here in the Empire State Building. It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you to the 12th annual Oslo Freedom Forum. This is the first fully online Oslo Freedom Forum. Hopefully it'll be the last time that we have to host this online. Because you see, the connection and presence of our community in one place in Oslo, Norway is incredibly inspiring, and it's so necessary to build those connections, to come together, to celebrate each other. Unfortunately, this year, we can't make it happen that way, so we're online. Whenever there's a discussion of world events, it seems that very few pundits and reporters, politicians, analysts are willing to point out the elephant in the room. Tyrannical government, dictatorship, the authoritarian state. So many prestigious and famous conferences, gatherings, governmental events, they shy away from this topic, perhaps wisely, given the number of guns and weapons and money and influence that repressive governments wield throughout the world and in international institutions. However, it's these very governments that are the focus of our event today. And I think it's important to make a distinction. Our event does not focus on democratic countries. Although we are shocked, horrified, and deeply concerned about such things as the rise of extremist movements in democratic countries, although we're stunned by videos of police brutality, and especially of the sometimes outrageous statements and actions of political leaders in the West, the truth is that democracies have built-in systems to address these matters. Systems such as separation of powers, independent judicial systems, rights such as freedom of expression, the right to protest and peacefully assemble, and also the right to elect the leadership of a country through free and fair elections. Western democracies have civil societies and watchdog groups, and we can see in real time populations organizing and coming together to keep government accountable, to keep government serving the people. That's not possible in countries that are authoritarian. By the last count, more than 4 billion people, or 54% of the world's population in 95 countries, are living under tyranny. Government is not there to serve them. Government is there to keep them in line. And what are most of these governments, these unelected group of men with guns? They're criminal organizations with embassies and with government departments. They maintain control through fear and repression and intimidation, and their main objective is to accumulate wealth. And they remain in power to cover up their crimes and to achieve and perpetuate impunity for themselves and their henchmen. Those individuals working to address the problem of tyranny are facing almost impossible odds. For more than a decade at the Oslo Freedom Forum, we've created a community, a home, a network, a megaphone for some of the bravest and most influential dissidents in the world. They have dedicated and often risked their lives challenging authoritarian governments that violate the most basic rights of billions of people around the world. In the past decades, we have brought together in Norway thousands of dissidents and activists here to this event from more than 100 countries around the world. This is a celebration. We're here to celebrate what you do. We're here to pay tribute to you and to figure out how we can help you. Unfortunately, this work has risks. Many in our community have been shot at, jailed, tortured. They've been separated from their families. They've been forced into exile, or they've even been poisoned. Raed Faris, one of our speakers who was in Oslo with us in 2018, was killed for his pro-democracy work just months later in Syria. And on the heels of that very same Oslo Freedom Forum, just a few months after it, a prominent Saudi participant, Jamal Khashoggi, was brutally murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul after orders were given directly by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to have him killed. We owe it to individuals like Raed and Jamal to continue to promote a more democratic world at whatever the cost, to be resilient in the face of adversity. Our theme this year is precisely that one, resilience. The health and ensuing political crises of the past 8 months have reminded us how authoritarians use human tragedy to advance their own agendas. Corrupt regimes around the world have exploited the COVID-19 pandemic to tighten restrictions on freedom of speech, arrest peaceful protesters, and silence activists. The courage and determination of activists and citizens have been tested. Yet they remain resilient in the face of tyranny. Resilience is the essential attribute of today and the future. So I invite you to join us in standing alongside the most courageous dissidents of our time. Let's bear witness to their resilience, to their strength. Please enjoy today's programming. Here we go.
Participants, human rights defenders, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by expressing my deep respect and admiration for the global community of human rights defenders and democracy advocates, and for all your efforts during the last turbulent months. There are few places where our support is more crucial right now than in Belarus. Norway condemns the brutal clampdown by the authorities to silence the legitimate demands of the people of Belarus. Their courageous and inspiring cause for change, democracy, and human rights compel us all to offer the best support we can. Norway is committed to doing so. At last year's meeting, the Norwegian foreign minister commented on the progress that human rights defenders have made in different areas as a result of dedicated efforts over many years, sometimes in collaboration with governments, but often in the face of stiff resistance. She touched upon the global reach of your movement, your increased effectiveness, and the improved protection in law and access to remedy. The Norwegian-led resolutions in Geneva and New York have also shown that there is a broad support for a stronger normative framework to protect human rights defenders. The fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic is still presenting us with serious challenges, and I think it's safe to say that we are not done yet. We have seen many examples of citizens and authorities rallying to protect public health, preserve jobs and social fabric, and safeguard political institutions. This is very encouraging. At the same time, we have also seen how vulnerable fundamental human rights and democratic principles are in times of uncertainty and crisis. The pandemic is exacerbating the existing negative trend of shrinking space for civil society. Peaceful protesters face restrictions and also heavy-handed clampdowns. The pandemic has been used as a pretext for increasing government control at the expense of rule of law and the separation of the powers. We have also seen targeted measures to silence critical voices, limiting freedom of expression and opinion. Access to information is also being restricted, often motivated by an increase in disinformation and misinformation related to the pandemic. Human rights defenders are particularly vulnerable at a time when physical meetings and travel are more difficult to carry out. Furthermore, the pandemic is having an uneven impact, affecting some people's lives far more than others. The consequences are often worse for minorities whose communities are already dealing with marginalization and discrimination. One of the many groups that the Norwegian government has a particular focus on is the LGBTI community. We find it especially worrying when European countries such as Poland introduce measures that limit fundamental rights based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The Norwegian government is concerned about attempts to roll back advances in sexual and reproductive health and rights, including by the United States. This seriously hampers our efforts to combat violence against women, one of the most widespread and persistent human rights violations globally. It is very discouraging to hear that Poland and Turkey may consider withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention, and in Hungary's case, not ratifying. This could not have come at the worst time, given the alarming increase in domestic violence and abuse during the pandemic lockdowns. In this situation, we must rally our defenses to protect the rules-based world order and the multilateral cooperation based on respect for the dignity and equal rights of all, without discrimination, and where countries are held accountable. This is crucial to Norway, and we will, of course, keep working with civil society organizations and defenders on the ground. We will continue to follow up this issue at the UN, including when we join the UN Security Council in January. Human rights will remain the central element in our bilateral engagement with all countries, including China. Norway has expressed concern about the human rights situation for Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang, as well as about legislation restricting civil and political rights and democratic space in Hong Kong. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted how important multilateral cooperation is. It is a timely reminder that the multilateral system and the obligations it entails must also serve those who stand up for human rights. I am confident that this year's Oslo Freedom Forum will be an inspiring event, and I hope it will allow you to explore new ways to do your work despite the current situation. I wish you all the best in your continued efforts to protect and promote human rights. Thank you.
$1.8 million people. That is the number of Uyghur individuals who we believe are held right now in the internment camps in China. That's 1 of every 10 Uyghurs. They are in more than 1,000 concentration camps. This subject is not new. Radio Free Asia, where I work, began exposing the mass detentions in China's Uyghur region in 2017, and the other news outlets around the world soon verified our reports, and groups and governments have raised concerns about the topic, but the reality remains. Megha Rajagopalan, 2 years ago, right here at the Oslo Freedom Forum, asked,
does the rest of the world care enough to act on this? Do we?
And the question continues to be asked in different ways, in different places. What happens next? The fate of an entire ethnic group, an entire people living in China's far west, rests on the answer. The well-being of people like me, Uyghurs outside of China with relatives back home, also rests on it. What happens next? I have, in my way, tried to help telling the stories of those powerless to speak freely, to share their situations with each other and the world. Me, my colleagues at Radio Free Asia, and the numerous of journalists have worked to expose the abuses that would otherwise be silenced by China's state-controlled media and CCP authorities. Let me share my personal story, how I became a journalist working far, far away from homeland and family. My career in journalism started at China's state-run Xinjiang TV, where I created the first children programs for the Uyghur children. It was instantly popular, and I became well-known by Uyghurs and recognized on Chinese radio and on TV in commercials, music videos, and movies. But when I traveled to Europe in 2001, I heard the real, uncensored Uyghur history on Radio Free Asia for the first time. I suddenly realized my job, which I loved, had little to do with journalism and everything to do with China's state-run propaganda. I felt guilty for lying to my own people, and I felt used by Chinese government. I decided then and there to escape and work for Radio Free Asia in the United States. It was the most painful decision I ever made in my life, as I was warned it would put my family at risk. But I couldn't lie anymore. When I first arrived in the US, I had nobody. I had lost of all my achievements in China, and I didn't speak any English. I went from being somebody to being a nobody. But deep inside, I was happy because I was free, and I would never again contribute to the structure of lies that keeps the Chinese tyranny in power. During my first broadcast without a pseudonym and RFA, I instantly reconnected with my audience back home. Uyghurs in Xinjiang still recognize my voice. Almost immediately, China banned my old recordings in China. Security service harassed my family and friends, interrogating, threatening, and forcing others to cut ties with my family. The Chinese government sees foreign media such as RFA as a threat because we are exposing Chinese government's lies. It was a difficult time for me. What kept me strong was that in my mind, I could hear my father's voice from my childhood reassuring me, choose freedom for yourself and be a voice for freedom. He was the one who taught me to boldly tell the truth on the international stage. He was the one who encouraged me not to return for my own safety. The one who provided me my moral compass and instilled in me the necessity of being voice for my people when their voices are silenced. In 2017, the Chinese government's crackdown on Uyghurs intensified. In September 2017, Xinjiang Security Service took my brothers to concentration camp. They told my parents it was because of my reporting. China's Security Service tried to take away my American freedom and ensure my silence by holding members of my family hostage. They wanted me to stop reporting and even to return to my homeland to be silenced. Instead, I continued my reporting, and I did more. My focus became the disappearances, crackdowns on religion freedom, the installation of an Orwellian mass surveillance police state. I even testified in Congress. As I testify before you today, it grieves me to know and to say that my parents remain under threat, and more than 24 of my relatives in China are missing, almost certainly held in re-education camps run by Chinese government. They rounded up dozens of my family members in January 2018 and took my parents to the camps too. After my testimony in Congress, several congressmen wrote a letter to Beijing to demand my family's release. Thanks to the intervention of these legislators, most of my family are free today. Unfortunately, my story is not unique. There are millions of Uyghurs like me who are separated from their families, and I am trying my best to tell their stories through my job as a journalist. You all know the horrible crimes against Uyghurs already, The issues have been news headlines for years. Millions of Uyghurs are kept in concentration camps for no reason other than the fact that they are Uyghurs. There's widespread violence against Uyghur women. They are forced to undergo abortions and even sterilization. Uyghurs are abused as forced laborers and worked in factories where they made thousands of products for exports. The Chinese government exports to other countries its high-tech mass surveillance systems. The government intentionally separates Uyghur children from their parents. The leaked China cables, Xinjiang papers, and the Karkash documents all detail the terrible human rights abuses the Chinese government is undertaking. It is crystal clear from its agenda that the ultimate goal of the Chinese government is to completely eliminate the culture, language, religion, and the identity of Uyghurs in China. So let me remind you of the question that needs to be answered. What happens next? Earlier this year, the U.S. Holocaust Museum held an event with members of U.S. Congress, journalists, and human rights advocates about the mass detentions and the treatment of Uyghurs and Chinese Muslim minorities in China's Uyghur region. The speakers railed around a familiar cry, never again, recognizing that this situation there has only worsened since it was first exposed by me and my colleagues. In order for the phrase never again to be truthful, we have to answer, what happens next? The good news is that every person can participate in the answer. Human rights groups and advocates have identified concrete action that the world can take. These actions, when taken by the global community, would end complicity by putting its money where it counts. Do not buy the wigs made of Uyghur women's hair that was shaved off their heads when they entered the concentration camps. Do not let China be the world's leading telecoms producer, while 12 million Uyghurs in China are not allowed to use telephones to connect to the outside world. Do not buy clothes and electronics made by Uyghur forced labor. Do not allow China total exemption in manufacturing from any due diligence in Xinjiang. What happens next? The US government has finally begun taking some actions. And there are now calls inside the European Union and the Australian government to impose sanctions on China. What happens next? For those of us watching the slow motion cultural genocide of the Uyghur people. If nothing happens next, then the answer is known by everyone has studied history or visited any of the Holocaust museums. Do you value freedom enough to say never again to the atrocities facing millions of my people, the Uyghurs? Or will the appeal of China's market power by your silence and inaction until your own freedoms are targeted? Urge you to determine for yourself what your answer will be. What role will you play? What happens next?
Hi everyone, my name is Mohamed Nagi. I am 28 years old, doctor from Sudan. Like millions of my fellow Sudanese, I grew up hopeless, desperate, and disappointed in the way our country turned out to be under the 30 years dictatorship of Al-Bashir's Islamist regime. But the good news is that we have brought him down in the end. Al-Bashir is now standing trial after our peaceful and non-violent revolution toppled him in April 2019. But ladies and gentlemen, this outcome was not preordained by any means. In May 2013, I was still a university student when I came to realize al-Bashir's regime through brutality. I was part of the opposition alliance that was competing against the pro-regime students in the University Students Alliance elections. On the same day that the lists were supposed to be presented, massive armed forces stormed the campus. They were accompanied by the loyal regime students who were dressed in military uniforms, riding small pickups, and wearing Kalashnikovs over their shoulders. These vehicles started circling around us with our fellow students who were pro-al-Bashir regime followers, starting firing from their Kalashnikovs over our heads. I don't think I will ever forget this scene. It showed me the true nature of al-Bashir regime and how it has only violence as response. This feeling was confirmed later in September 2013 when massive protests took to the streets, mainly by also university students, and they were met by huge amount of violence, resulting in more than 200 people killed. But from both of these unsuccessful protests, the lesson I learned was the regime only success was due to our failure in how he has been successful in keeping us all the time divided. I think that is the moment when I found my true calling, setting out with colleagues to try and understand and find a solution to this dilemma. How do we unite the opposition to come together and work together to find a way and remove this very brutal regime in a peaceful manner? By then, I had graduated and became a physician. The logical next step, allowing me to seize on the Sudanese trade union's rich and profound role since the colonial era as a vanguard for the social and political movements for change in Sudan. In early 2016, I joined the Central Committee of Sudan's Doctors, known as CCSD, although it was not officially recognized by the regime, but then the regime had to contend with it due to the profound role of doctors in general in Sudan. By November 2016, CCSD has managed to lead the largest and biggest strike of doctors in the history of Sudan. This was a strategic turning point that has broke the barriers of fears for doctors and also for largest numbers of other professionals. So lawyers, journalists, and teachers felt emboldened by this activity of doctors, which eventually led to a large and dramatic increase in the activity of professionals in general. We came together and we have established the Sudanese Professionals Association. The regime didn't seem to understand this monumental shift. We have solved the main problem that has plagued us for years. A body that can be trusted by the masses was finally there. We evened the balance of powers by unifying these professionals and by establishing the Sudanese Professionals Association, a unity that was later cemented by drafting the Declaration of Freedom and Change. This document became a vehicle that has brought together political parties and different ideologies from all around the political sphere of Sudan, transcending parties and ideologies for the first time in decades in my country, establishing the largest coalition in Sudan's history, the Forces for Freedom and Change. On January 2019, I had the privilege of being the first member of the SPA to ever go public on a Facebook Live video, announcing the Declaration of Freedom and Change and confirming the leadership of SPA. Within 3 days, I was detained by the security apparatus and spent 98 days arrested, during which I was constantly interrogated about the SPA and its members, threatened that I will be there for at least a whole year, and was repeatedly told that there is nothing happening outside and that it is all over. Well, that was not entirely true. Something was happening. An uprising had begun and it would last for another 8 months. What happened and ensued was a battle of will. Millions of Sudanese, young and old, and especially women, formed local resistance committees. These committees were independent but highly coordinated grassroots cells that kept the revolution all the way peaceful and highly energized. The entire affair is best summarized by the words of a young protester who was killed and shot by the gunfire of the regime. "Oh, my friend, we are tired, but we cannot lay during the battle." His name was Abu Bakr Abdul Azim. He was one of more than 200 killed, thousands wounded, and more than 40 disappeared during the dictatorship vain attempt to break the will of an entire people. They failed. People won. Or did we? It depends on how you define winning. We were euphoric when we toppled Albasheer in April 2019, but a new battle had already begun. We never gave up on the non-violent pathway for change. We rose up time after time, holding onto that spark of hope, the mightiest of which was on the 30th of June, huge demonstrations. Just 27 days after the 3rd of June Khartoum massacre, an event that was orchestrated on the sole purpose of crushing that hope. The regime knew that their only way for defeating us was through crushing our hope, by snatching that light away from us and sending us back into darkness. We were not about to allow for our revolution to be contained and smothered, as happened elsewhere around us in our region. And let me be honest here. These powers will never want their influence to be affected. It's not in their interest to see people controlling their own destiny or their own resources. In our region, proxy wars are everywhere, competing regional and international powers who won't face each other directly, or maybe they don't want to, but rather do that in other people's lands, spilling other people's blood, and literally sabotaging their whole future, with the whole world seeing that, remaining silent and almost like blinded. And today, here in Sudan, we are no exception. Despite this massive interference, both politically and financially, we held fast. We got to a transitional government that with hope and determination will pave the way for sustainable democracy in Sudan. Our story is not a success story yet. Democracy needs time. We need to keep building up the momentum towards lasting political and social change in Sudan, ending the short-sighted political agendas, and most importantly, always focusing on the big picture, a free and a democratic Sudan. Ladies and gentlemen, friends of freedom, I will be frank with you here. We cannot walk this road without you. You may think Sudan is a world way away from you personally, or that in the great scheme of things, your voice is but a whisper in a stormy world. I humbly tell you that you are wrong. Tell your leaders and your elected officials to not fall for the age-old cliche that democracy is not attainable in our part of the world. We are building one right now in Sudan, more than 60 years on. Sudan's tragic history makes it abundantly clear that dictatorship is the most geopolitical destabilizing force, not democracy. As long as there are dictatorships, wars, human rights abuses, anywhere in the world, democracy and human rights are threatened everywhere. In the end, I hope that many of you will come to my country and witness this change, a rise of a new oasis of democracy in a desert of dictatorships. You are welcome to the new Sudan, and thank you.
Thailand, my country, is not a democracy. Coup d'etat is normal. I was born in 1978. It was in 1991 when I, at the age of 13, first experienced a coup. The 1991 coup d'etat led to a huge protest demanding a return to democracy in central Bangkok in 1992. Military crackdown followed, resulting in 44 government-confirmed deaths and more than 1,000 wounded. Many still went missing. Families of these brave people don't even have a chance to properly bury their loved ones. The second coup I encountered was in 2006. It was the start of depolarization among the Thai people. You may recall the division between the yellow shirts, the pro-establishment forces, and the red shirts, the pro-democracy forces. The 2006 coup and series of events after that led to another military crackdown in 2010. This time, 99 people died and more than 1,000 people wounded. No one has been held accountable until today. I was 28 when this 2006 coup happened. I was old enough to actively participate in protests against the rule of the junta. The latest coup was in 2014 when General Prayut Chan-o-cha, the current Prime Minister, staged a coup. Since then, the junta has cracked down on political opposition, suppressed free speech and human rights, taken control of large swaths of the media, brutally repressed all forms of dissent, and wrecked the economy for the benefit of the few. Those who stood in its way were thrown in jail or forced into exile. The junta wrote a new constitution in 2017 to ensure that General Prayut will return to power after an election. With the 2017 constitution in place, the junta was ready to organize an election. A fresh election was called in March 2019. It has been more than 100 years since the effort to democratize Thailand was first attempted. In 1912, a group called Morleng Rebellion tried to end absolutism in Thailand. They failed. 2 decades later, the People's Party seized the power from the palace and established constitutional monarchy. Absolutism did not surrender easily. For the past 100 years, the history of Thailand has been a power struggle between unsubmissive masses and the elite few. The evidence of this struggle is tangible. Thailand has more coups than any other countries in the world. 88 years since the revolution, we have gone through 13 coups, or 1 coup d'etat in every 6.7 years. In the last 88 years, Thailand has had 29 prime ministers. Only one served full 4-year term as a democratically elected prime minister. 88 years. We have had 20 constitutions. That means we cannot agree on what terms we want to live and thrive together as a society. We cannot agree on how power should be shared between different political institutions. Enough is enough. Somebody must stop this vicious cycle of coup d'etat, democratic protest, writing a new constitution, an election, short-lived democracy, and then another coup d'etat. This cycle must end within our generation. There must not be another coup d'etat in the future. Sustainable democracy must be established. Our children, they deserve better. Under this context, I decided to quit my business career and entered politics. I was 36 when the junta staged the last coup. I was an executive running my family businesses. Until then, I had a comfortable life, but I knew I couldn't be happy. You see, in Thailand, a few big families monopolize many sectors of the market. They created an enormous amount of wealth without having to create innovations that serve the society. They accumulate their wealth through concessions with the government or by lobbying the government to keep laws that keep their monopolies intact. As a result, inequality in Thailand is among the worst in the world by some measure. According to Credit Suisse, in 2018, the richest 1% controls a shocking 67% of all wealth in the country. These big businesses are natural allies of the junta. They have supported military regimes in the past, and they continue to support the regime today. Because the market is so controlled, business people know that expressing opposing political views against the establishment can cost them their entire businesses or their jobs. People internalize this fear and hence the widespread self-censorship among them. The rich can afford the luxury to stay silent. They send their kids to schools in the US or in the UK. They spend winters skiing in Hokkaido. They spend their summers drinking wine in Europe. But average Thais cannot afford to be silent. Submission means nothing will ever change. They fight so hard economically to send their kids to good schools. Even working 10 hours a day for 40 years, average Thai workers cannot even have their own houses or enough savings for their retired years. The fruits of economic growth go to the hands of the few, not the many. I quit my career to set up a new political party. In early 2018, the Future Forward Party. Our campaign calls for a truly democratic, equal, and free Thailand. We won 6.3 million votes, making us the third largest political party in the country. All this happened in just 10 months after the inception of the party. But because the mechanisms in the constitution the junta put in place, General Prayut resumed power as a prime minister. Our party became the opposition. We became a serious threat to the establishment. So it wasn't a surprise when the Constitutional Court dissolved our party in February 2020. I was banned from politics for 10 years. Other party leaders and I altogether have some 20 legal charges against us. Persecutions against me may not be far away. My freedom may be limited. But I will continue the fight until my liberty is taken away from me. Because I know the future we want, the one we are trying to build, is worth the risk. We do not know what the future may hold. But we do know that the establishment doesn't have much tolerance against freedom fighters. Many of us have lost their lives or their freedom for just causes. The causes we all in this forum believe in. This is Nuam Thong Praiwan. Nuam Thong was a taxi driver. When the junta staged a coup in 2006, he drove his taxi right into a tank to protest against the coup with his life. He was severely injured but didn't die. While he was in a hospital, an army general looked down at his effort and said in a public interview that nobody would sacrifice themselves for democracy. He proved the general's statement otherwise. In the middle of the night, he left the hospital, wrote a letter to his family, and hung himself. This is Surachai Danvatananusorn. Surachai was a political activist. He was jailed for 7 years for criticizing the monarchy. He fled to Laos after the 2014 coup. He went missing in December 2018. A month later, bodies of his colleagues who disappeared during the same time were found in Mekong River. He is presumed dead. This is Anon Nampa, a human rights lawyer and a poet. He is in his mid-30s. Lately, Anon led a demonstration calling for a new constitution and monarchy reform. He was jailed for that and now released on bail. This is Rung. Rung was born into a middle-class family. She is one of the student leaders. She is charged with sedition charge and violating the emergency decree. The emergency decree, which is supposed to be used as a tool to contain the spread of coronavirus, now being used to suppress people's freedom. She is now released on bail. Rung continues her role as a student leader despite risking being put in jail. This is us. These are the faces of people who led the struggle for a democratic Thailand. Faces of people who believe Thailand can be a beacon of hope for people who still living under authoritarian regimes in ASEAN. The torch that lights the flame of the struggle has been passed from one generation to another over the last 100 years. We honor these people. The little freedom we are enjoying today wasn't given by the mercy of the elite, but by the sacrifices these people made. And now the new chapter of the struggle has begun. Youths all over the country have organized hundreds of protests against the regime over the last 2 months. LGBTQ are calling for gender equality, while Muslim students are calling for tolerance, diversity, and an end to abusive law enforcement. High school students are calling for an end to harassment at school. They, however, share one common demand: an authoritarian culture that has long ruled over Thailand. Never before has there been a movement that challenges the political and cultural domination of the elite at the same time and at this magnitude. The flame of hope has never been brighter. We will continue this struggle until Thailand becomes democratic. To those around the world who are fighting for the same cause, I hope that our story inspires you as yours have inspired us. To those who live in a democracy, learn from us. Don't take democracy for granted. Fight to preserve it. And that concludes my talk today. Thank you very much.
Uyghur culture was formed by centuries-long spiritual and cultural exchanges in between East and West. Since 2017, Uyghur culture has faced an unprecedented challenge due to Chinese government's oppressive regime. Millions of people has been sent to so-called Chinese re-education camps. In those camps, there are also philosophers, artists, writers, poets, those who has been working hard to keep Uyghur culture alive as a human expression. In this very critical moment, more than 10 Uyghur music lovers based in Europe came together and decided to act. Uyghur European Ensemble was created in April 2019, later registered as a non-profit organization in Sweden. Their mission is not only to keep Uyghur music alive, but also to bring it to a wider audience. Today, you will discover a glimpse of a traditional repertoire called 12 Muqam, and also a composition from a beloved composer who passed away recently. It is a great honor for Uyghur European Ensemble to be part of this year's Oslo Freedom Forum. Many thanks to Freedom Forum to provide this platform to share Uyghur music and also bring attention to this ongoing crime against humanity.
Mahbubum senin yaşın senin yaşın azar olsun Nikab aşkın küreğimizi Cemalın aşkar olsun Gitme didarın gece gündüz Senin yadın minnettir daim kışımda kışımda şerli sar olsun.
Thank you for joining us for the first session of our virtual Oslo Freedom Forum. As we head into intermission, we'd like to take this opportunity to spotlight some activists in our network and tell you about some of our programs, starting by highlighting our program, Celebrities and Dictators. Celebrities often leverage their public platforms to get involved in human rights and to enact positive change in the world. But the reverse can also be true. The greed and lust for power are staggering. Mariah Carey, Jennifer Lopez, Usher, Kanye West, Hilary Swank, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Liam Payne, they are at the top of the list of celebrated artists who have chosen to line their pockets with dictator cash while serving as propaganda tools of dictatorships. When celebrities accept invitations for appearances from dictators, they're really serving the public relations interests of governments that in some cases execute people for the crime of being who they are. At the Human Rights Foundation, we believe that celebrities participating in events sponsored by tyranny send a message that dictatorships can simply purchase the endorsements of celebrities. They send a message that these dictatorships are so acceptable that the world's elite artists bow down to them. Our work is to motivate celebrities to prioritize morals over money by canceling their scheduled appearances for dictators, and instead use their fame to issue statements of solidarity with the billions of people living under oppressive rule worldwide. This helps expose the hypocrisy of dictators and prevents them from legitimizing their regimes with celebrities. And we've had success. Last year, we called on Nicki Minaj to cancel her scheduled performance in Saudi Arabia. She did cancel her show, and by doing so, served as an important voice for those within the dictatorship's borders and beyond. This past July, during the Belarus protests that you'll hear more about tomorrow, rappers Tyga and St. John both canceled their performances in Minsk after we publicized the letter we wrote to them and their agents, citing the Belarus regime's human rights abuses. Both artists listened to their dedicated fans who moved the needle on support for human rights in the right direction and said in very clear terms, "We want you to perform eventually for a democratic Belarus, but now is not the right time." These are just a few examples of how celebrities can use their followings to start conversations, perhaps leading to change for the better. People everywhere can connect and help denounce dictators by boycotting events that advance the agendas of authoritarian regimes. And we encourage everyone to join in the conversation and urge your favorite stars to live up to their responsibilities, which means not performing for dictators. We hope you enjoy learning more about some of our featured programs and activists during this intermission, and we'll see you back here after the break for the second session of today's programming and more opportunities to interact with our community.
Many of the things Vladimir Putin started to do when he came to power were about bringing things back to where they were in Soviet time. My generation is old enough just about to remember the Soviet period and to remember what things were like back then. To me, the most troubling, the most worrisome, the most catastrophic aspects of Putin's rule from its very beginning was this gradual but very determined dismantling of the political freedoms. Well, frankly, I felt as if I was losing my country, and that's how many people felt of democratic institutions in Russia, to the extent that today we're finding our country under a full-fledged authoritarian regime with hundreds of political prisoners, with opponents of the government who are threatened, harassed, imprisoned, or killed. I became involved in Russian politics at about exactly the same time when Putin came to power. So this was at the very end of 1999, when I began to work with Boris Nemtsov, who was the clearest, the loudest, the most powerful voice in opposition to the authoritarianism and the corruption of the Putin regime. And I'd worked with him, alongside him, for more than 15 years, from the late 90s and until that wretched evening when he was killed in front of the Kremlin. It's one of principle for me to be continuing this work, because I think we could give no better present to the Putin regime than if we all just gave up and ran, and we're just not going to do that. I was subjected to 2 poisoning attacks, 2 murder attempts, both times in Moscow, both times using some kind of very sophisticated chemical toxin. The effect of it was to basically shut down all of my life organs. Within a space of a few hours, I went into a coma. These attacks, both of them, were directly connected with my line of work. They were retributions for my political activities in Russian opposition, more specifically, I think my work over the years on the Magnitsky legislation and the targeted sanctions in Western countries against Russian government officials complicit in corruption and human rights abuses. People, not just from Russia, but from anywhere in the world, who are complicit, obviously based on credible evidence, in grand corruption or gross human rights abuses in their home countries, will no longer be able to get visas to the West, own assets in the West, or use the financial and banking systems of the West. The brilliance of this principle is also that you are not targeting an entire country of 140 million people in case of Russia for the actions, of a few crooks and criminals in the Kremlin. You go after them personally. That's the brilliance. It's the principle of personal accountability. I think that one of the most important goals of my work is to make sure that Putin and his people don't usurp and monopolize, the right to speak on behalf of Russia to the entire world, as they have usurped and monopolized political power inside the country. And that people in democratic nations hear not just the voices of Putin, Lavrov, and these other Kremlin officials, but also the voices of Russian Democrats, of Russian civil society, of those people in Russia who have a very different vision for our country than those who are currently sitting in the Kremlin. We are no less Russian than Vladimir Putin. Probably the more important way in which we are trying to prepare for that future transition is to actually work with the generation that will be in charge of it. We believe there's nothing more important than to work and to help train and educate and support and empower them. As a historian, I know that there's anything that modern Russian history teaches us is that major political changes in our country can happen suddenly and unexpectedly. We do not know when or how the Putin regime is going to leave power, but we do know that it will, because nothing is forever. Russia is not just about Putin and the crooks and criminals around him. Russia is about so much more. It's so much bigger and frankly so much better than those people who are sitting in the Kremlin. Please stop saying Russia when you mean Putin. Please make a distinction. Please make a difference. Please don't equate a nation, a great and very culturally rich nation, with an authoritarian regime that misrules it. However strong a dictatorship, when enough people are willing to stand up, they succeed.
Mr. President.
The Human Rights Foundation just claims that J.Lo has made millions over the past 2 years performing for some of the world's most notorious dictators.
These are people with crimes against humanity. These are dictators. These are the worst of the worst.
All money's not good money.
The pop sensation on thin ice this morning after allegedly banking $1 million performing for Angolan President Jose Eduardo dos Santos.
Breaking news this afternoon, the proposed takeover of Newcastle is off.
It was not a simple football deal. This was Saudi Arabia buying a football club, and it has a pretty poor record when it comes to human rights.
The Human Rights Foundation called upon Minaj and other artists to withdraw from the concert.
Me and Tiger were supposed to be on our jet this morning, headed to Belarus. I think there's more important things than him being on stage and me being on stage, just doing it for the sake of excitement.
4 billion people are living under authoritarian rule. It is the largest problem affecting humanity today.
Hoy Nicaragua es una cárcel. Simplemente alzar la bandera o cantar el himno nacional es sujeto de encarcelamiento en mi país en este momento. En casi 200 años hemos vivido en guerras, en dictaduras e intervenciones militares. Que hay más de 50.000 personas que han salido del país, que están emigrando a Costa Rica, a España, a Panamá, a Estados Unidos, buscando libertad. Nosotros decimos que el único tranque se llama Daniel Ortega. Mi nombre es Edipcia Dubón, soy activista por la democracia y los derechos humanos en Nicaragua, exdiputada de la Asamblea Nacional de Nicaragua, destituida por el régimen de Ortega de forma ilegal. Y lucho por la restitución de la justicia, la apertura democrática y la libertad de los presos políticos en mi país. El trabajo que hago en Nicaragua o que hago por Nicaragua no fue una decisión, sino que las circunstancias que se vinieron construyendo con el régimen de Ortega. Daniel Ortega expresa lo peor del sandinismo en Nicaragua, expresa lo peor que puede hacer un ser humano y las personas que están alrededor de ellos, que han violado todos los derechos de los nicaragüenses. Mi participación política estaba marcada en un partido político que hizo una alianza un poco más amplia para combatir al régimen de Ortega en los espacios políticos. Nosotros alcanzamos representación parlamentaria en el año 2011. En el año 2016, de manera ilegal y arbitraria, el régimen suspendió nuestra representación parlamentaria a pesar de haber sido electos por el pueblo de manera casi caricaturesca, porque salió la presidenta de la Asamblea en la televisión diciendo que habíamos dejado de ser representantes y que sencillamente ya ni siquiera podíamos llegar al hemiciclo o estar en las instalaciones de la Asamblea. Parte de mi lucha ha sido que los ciudadanos del mundo sepan lo que pasa en Nicaragua, y sí nos hemos encontrado con muchas dificultades. Dificultades porque Nicaragua es un país pequeño que no afecta ni política ni económicamente a nadie, o sea, en términos netos. Entonces, el problema de Nicaragua pareciera que de pronto es un problema solo de los nicaragüenses. Y ya más recientemente, la situación del país cuando estalló la crisis de abril y se asesinaron a más de 300 personas y hoy están encarcelados más de 770 personas nicaragüenses, me obliga moralmente y éticamente a alzar mi voz frente a todo el mundo para que se conozca la realidad de Nicaragua y para que podamos lograr libertad. Y aquí estoy, y aquí estamos los nicaragüenses, ante pesados desafíos, pero con el corazón henchido de ganas de luchar por la libertad de nuestro pueblo y con la convicción de que lo vamos a lograr. Mis objetivos es que los nicaragüenses podamos vivir en un país con libertad y con justicia. Y que los más de 700 personas que están presas en Nicaragua sean libres. Que no haya más tortura, que no haya más violación. Mi objetivo es regresar a mi casa. Ese es mi objetivo, vivir en mi país.
When they arrived in the city, when they occupied Mosul, there was something different about them. They were well organized. They were in one uniform. They had new weapons as well as their black flags. And I felt the danger from the very first moment of that attack. Then I felt responsible. If I don't take responsibility of writing the history now, we will not just lose the city now, we will lose it forever. For whoever is controlling the narrative of the history will control the past and will control the future. That's how Mosul I was born. It was quite normal to every day go out and to see ISIS executing someone or lashing someone or beheading someone. As a historian, I always make sure that I witness things firsthand. I wander the streets every day. I go out, talk to the people, or even talk to some of ISIS fighters. It wasn't an easy process. My mind and brain was working every minute not to misbehave, because one single wrong act means the end of everything. Every day there was a threat. Every day the death was close to me. But there were days when I challenged the death. I had a proof and evidence of what ISIS was doing, which is the history I documented. So this made me feel strong. It doesn't matter even if I die, what I wrote will always be there. When ISIS is gone, the people started questioning like why Mosul I is still anonymous. And I told the world on December 2017 that it's me, Mosul I am Omar Mohammed. This is to say I defeated ISIS in my battle, that they couldn't expose me with all of this kind of like equipment, of technology, of cyber attacks they can do, but they couldn't expose me. Yeah, this was my greatest moment in my life. I am a clear target to them now, and they threatened me directly after I revealed my identity, and I had to hide somewhere under protection. And I'm always in this challenge of trying to get them away from me. It's too much risk, but the result, the good result of this is that there is amazing growing youth movement in the city. And I can see this from the projects and initiatives I did in the city of Mosul with many young people. When I see these results, I say it was worth doing. Oppressors like ISIS, they hate and they fear the history that is written out of their authority. Mosul I represent my freedom, the freedom of my city. It represents the future of Mosul. And it was always the voice of the voiceless, but now it's their eyes. And as they say, they call it, Mosul I is our eye in the world, because it's now focusing on the future of the city. All of this was for the freedom of our minds, the freedom of, or to free our future. When we are free, we are stronger than them, and they will fear us.
This is where we really have a community. This is where we build the sense of family. It's also about how we can unite in doing something meaningful, not only listening to the people who are doing something meaningful,
Yes, need people like you and me to stand together and fight for the change.
All those amazing people take the active, conscious choice to resist the war by building lives. Knowing, meeting, and hearing about these resilient people, I could not give up on peace and civil society.
Free Police officer escorted me from the police station after I was detained 24 hours after the July 28th protest in Central.
Because the fact that it's going to be a long journey cannot deter us. No dictatorship has ever lasted forever, but they do last longer if they're left unchallenged.
The Freedom Fellowship is the idea that brings together the top activists who are now in this family to the people coming from the world of media, fundraising, communication, digital security. The general idea is to help them build their movements on the ground.
I've learned something from every single aspect of this fellowship. In particular, organizing the movement building part, that has been the most important part. This is the only place where you can get access to these kind of people doing the same kind of work and these kind of mentors who have expertise there.
In any nonviolent fight, you need a strategy. That's what we learned during the Freedom Fellowship, how to organize a movement, public speaking, how to create awareness and make a change in your country using nonviolence.
Freedom Fellowship is a one-year program that's going to give 10 activists from across the world with the opportunity to build up their skills to battle against dictators in a safe and effective way. For them to be successful, we will certainly need your help. We have to unite to make this world a better place.
Imagine waking up early one morning and you see on the news that someone has been executed for the crime of protesting. How would you feel? It breaks your heart. That has happened to me and millions of other Iranians for 40 years. This time, it was Navid Afkari who was executed. He was just 27 years old, a wrestling champion who was arrested for taking part in the 2018 protest against the Islamic Republic. He was charged with waging war against God. Navid was tortured and forced to do false confession against himself. His two brothers were also arrested and also forced to give false testimony against Navid. He was secretly tried and given a death sentence. Human rights group said that evidence against Navid was invalid. The evidence obtained through torture. It didn't matter because his life didn't matter to the Islamic Republic. The regime didn't even allow Navid to have a final meeting with his family. After his execution, the security forces demanded that Navid must be buried within hours. That same night, he was taken to his village and put underground without ceremony. This dark turn events happening to Navid and his family because he had taken part in a peaceful protest. These days, every time When we turn on the TV, what we see? Just protests everywhere. In America, in Europe, in Hong Kong, in Lebanon. People bravely face tear gas and police charges. But in my country, Iran, when young people protest, then they face guns and bullets. And as you see, if they get arrested, then they could face the death penalty. That's because in the Islamic Republic of Iran, protests are not allowed. The regime argues that its opponents are resisting God's will, so they deserve to be killed. Navid was not the only one to be hanged for the crime of protesting. Mustafa Salehi, father of 2 children, was hanged also for the crime of protesting against the regime, and 3 more. There are more. Let's say their names. Amir Hossein, Mohammad, Saeed, Abbas, Majid, Hadi, Mehdi, Mohammad Bastami. The jails are full of activists who are resisting this dictatorship. Women's rights activists are in prison. Political activists, those who said no to Islamic Republic, right now they are in prison. Workers and teachers, members of Baha'is faith, environmental activists, they are in prison. Even the lawyers defending these activists are in prison. But do you think we, the activists outside Iran, are safe? No. We receive daily death threats, and they take our families hostage inside Iran to punish us, who give voice to voiceless people inside Iran. It is the working class. It is the working class protests that face the death row. The revolution was supposed to help them. Instead, the regime is killing them to terrorize the rest of the population and prevent another massive uprising like the ones that we had 2 years ago in last November. These protesters want to be happy. They just want jobs. They want a decent and normal life. That is why the civil society was galvanized to stop the hangings. The hashtag Stop Execution went viral, and it was tweeted more than 12 million times. Despite the massive outcry, the regime still murdered Navid Afkari. I am worried. Yes, millions of Iranians are worried that we will wake up another morning and see others on the death row have been executed as well. Now, we need a global call to action. That's why, after Navid's murder, I and many other activists have called for a ban on Islamic Republic international sports. That's it. The Islamic Republic violates the spirit of sports, abuses the athletes, and discriminates against its own people for ideological reasons. Women are banned from attending sports events. Athletes are ordered to purposely lose in competitions to avoid facing their Israeli counterparts. Today, more and more Iranians do not want to be part of an ideology that has created such a tyranny. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook remove the photos and footages of public executions as sensitive, but allow the officials of dictatorships to post their lies and denials on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Ironically, Facebook and Twitter are banned for Iranian ordinary citizens, but government officials have verified accounts. This is the right time for tech companies. I am talking to you, Jack. I'm talking to you, Mark Zuckerberg, to stand up to dictatorships and kick out officials that enforce censorship and executions from their platforms. It's time for the international community to stand up for human rights values. Here, I call on the European Union to support Iranian people and suspend their meetings with the officials who actually carry out the executions. I call on you to support the people in Iran who are saying no to hostage taking, to torture and executions. History will judge you.
Over the past year, I have been engaged in a project with a team to gather data on how the Chinese government is using technology to crack down on human rights. We rarely think of big data and human rights together, but oppressive governments are using technological advancements to more closely monitor their citizens, control their lives, what they say, and even what they think. Carrying phones to connected automobiles and facial recognition systems, big data is able to collect and sort this data in ways that would be unthinkable even a few years ago. Two specific changes have made this possible. First, technology has advanced now that computers can recognize and classify everything from faces to walking styles, store incomprehensible amounts of data, and recognize patterns that would elude human capabilities. Governments, and especially oppressive ones, are anxious to harness those capabilities. Second, technology reaches into our lives in ways that even a few years ago would have seemed astonishing. Whether it is the cameras that line public areas, to the voice-activated assistants in homes or payment features on phones, this massive data is a treasure trove to an oppressive government. China is the leading user of technology as a means of oppression. The data the Chinese government collects, how it classifies it and deploys it, truly boggles the mind. Chinese government officials have instant access to phone data from chat to payment records while outlawing encrypted apps like Signal and Telegram. They deploy enormous computing power, allowing algorithms to draw from and add to databases of restricted or sensitive words. These databases mark words for various degrees of sensitivity and actions when they are encountered in chats flowing through Chinese networks. Words that run afoul of censors may be immediately blocked or flagged for censor review. Thanks to the power of big data and ever-expanding databases, some of which we have now obtained, authorities in China can literally process every text message sent in a country of 1.4 billion people to make sure it is using approved words. These telephone databases are linked to others that record movement, such as building entry and movement across a city to go to work or visit friends. Building entry logs with phone, facial recognition, and national ID data is then linked to a camera network, allowing the state to use different cameras to track your every movement throughout the day. However, visual tracking only allows static monitoring and not the thought and belief surveillance that authoritarian states obsess over. As cameras and phones collect this data, servers and algorithms are assessing risks. Computers can no longer simply gather data, but they compute the risk we present to the state and know the beliefs we hold. Algorithms have a questionable track record in predicting individual outcome from risky inputs. But the bigger issue is how, in this case, an authoritarian government defines risk. Let me give you a simple example. An algorithm can very simply predict your health risks from tracking your purchases of cigarettes. The bigger problem is when authoritarian governments are allowed to define risk as a religious belief or political speech, and then create algorithms to predict the risk your loyalties lie somewhere besides a political party. For the first time, our team has obtained databases that allow us to analyze just how much data the Chinese government is collecting and even what they are collecting, and look at some of those databases the Chinese government uses to determine who is risky and who counts as a threat. Our team only has a small slice of what data China collects, but what we have seen is staggering. There is literally almost no action throughout the day the Chinese government does not monitor and record. We have more than 100 terabytes of data. Put another way, if you took 100 average computers with a normal 1 terabyte hard drive and filled them with nothing but raw data recording Chinese citizens going about their daily lives, that's what we have. Almost any action carried out in China can be recorded, and the Chinese government is mandating behavior be recorded and stored for analysis. Data of individuals going about their lives in a country of 1.4 billion people generates vast amounts of data when every action or moment is compiled in a government-controlled database. The Chinese government maintains logs tracking battery usage on vast amounts of devices throughout China. Data collected from this allows the Chinese government to determine the frequency of usage, location, and depending on the device, in some cases, hack into the device and control it. Video cameras no longer just capture people in a crowd, but record fine-grained details about individuals that allow authorities to make higher-level determinations. The data collected is not blunt, indiscriminate collection, but detailed and granular, allowing deep analysis. Chinese authorities use the broad range of data to analyze anything the Chinese Communist Party considers a threat. For example, China uses a variety of visual metrics to classify individuals based upon whether they are a suspected terrorist, a foreigner, suspicious, or a criminal. These values are estimated based upon a combination of algorithms, analytics, and links to other databases that help Chinese authorities determine in near real time who to stop. Individuals that have higher risk scores for being a foreigner or suspicious or using blocked words can be tracked across a city to see who they might be with or where they might go. What would take an entire police unit before can now be done from a chair by one individual, and now Chinese authorities with big data can run these on autopilot, alerting them when people engage in behavior they do not like. To process this vast amount of data, the Chinese Communist Party relies on an enormous amount of computing power to take the raw data and assign risk assessments to individuals based upon who you meet with, where you go, your facial characteristics, and even how you dress. Another example is the way Chinese authorities can censor the internet. These risk assessments are fed into algorithms that can immediately delete sensitive words or flag them for additional human analysis. Chinese authorities can place individuals who use censored words on watch lists. Posts with keywords that might anger Chinese authorities disappear. Even graphics and videos are put through algorithms to detect material that might be considered seditious. The Chinese government flags users based upon regular use of high-risk words. Users knowing this create an evolving linguistic game where authorities are constantly restricting more words as users create or borrow words to refer to the originally intended target. Chinese authorities have created detailed databases of how words in text messages or images or videos, even having certain content, should be flagged based upon specific parameters. Use the words or share a politically sensitive video enough, and you will receive a visit known as an invitation to tea from Chinese security services based upon nothing more than computers noticing your specific posts, words, or images. Most worrying is what constitutes risk to the Chinese government. In democracies, we think of violence as a key risk. In China, ideas are a risk to the government. Anything that might make you less loyal to the Chinese Communist Party makes you a risk. Your mention on social media of democracy, a religious belief, or a historical event, a racial or ethnic characteristic, what you wear, or who you meet with. All of this data is put into separate databases, and scores are generated about the risk you present. Importantly, we have found no evidence of any legal system that prevents any government official from accessing any data at any time. Any individual in China can be monitored for any reason or on the whim of an official for not carrying proper thinking. In most democratic societies, data can only be accessed on citizens by the government making a legal request through mechanisms such as warrants. In China, private data can be accessed by the government for any reason on any individual. Security officials can imprison individuals based on private data, not simply for criminal behavior, but for freedom of thought, religious belief, conscience, and political speech, all things considered illegal in China. As our ability to harvest data explodes, this presents a challenge for open, democratic societies. We cannot stop technology's ability to better record every aspect of our lives, but we can set boundaries and laws about how data is used and accessed. Even in the United States, firms have an astounding ability to peek into the most intimate aspects of our lives with very little restriction. Firms like Google and Facebook are the focus of political concern due to their ability to shape debate and information flows that used to be reserved for authoritarian governments. Each side in American politics calls on Facebook and Google to block information they believe does not accurately portray facts or events, with Twitter restricting some posts. Messages can be catered to audience with amazing specificity, thanks to big data and the overwhelming amount of information these companies possess about us. Governments continue to try and expand their ability to tap into the flood of data we're creating. While there are undoubtedly public goods in certain areas like crime, how can we ensure that even open liberal democracies do not sacrifice security for freedom and privacy? What can we do to pressure China and protect democratic rights in our own countries? We need to focus on improved data security and setting new legal standards. We live in a social media technology-rich age where seemingly every detail is recorded, taped, and played endlessly. That means we need to secure everything from where data is stored to who has access to the data. Not only is China collecting mass amounts of data, our team has collected data stored in China that allows the Chinese government to track everything from individuals to electronics around the world. We can no longer take it for granted the security of this data. Authorities in China maintain ongoing mass data collection and monitoring programs on individuals and institutions well beyond its own borders. Data flow is both global and specific to the individual. The Chinese government is harvesting data on its own citizens and foreigners alike because it is attempting to redefine global standards. Open liberal democracies need to take the lead and define data privacy and protection standards to both strengthen our own democracies as well as challenge the Chinese government practices. Defining, enforcing, and spreading acceptable data collection and uses for states and firms will isolate authoritarian practices. Devices and software are designed with these uses in mind. Changing what they can or should do at even a standards level will alter design practices. It will change how products are created. Democracies may not be able to directly challenge the Chinese government's practices on its own citizens. However, it can make it increasingly difficult and unacceptable against a backdrop of greater data privacy standards globally. We need to improve legislative limits on data collection and access by governments and corporations. Google Search, for instance, has such a treasure trove of data that it claims to better predict certain cancers simply from user behavior. Finally, we need greater oversight of how corporations and governments are using and protecting data, from how data is routed to how it is stored to who has access to it. Consumers and citizens need greater assurances and legal certainty about how their data is managed and accessed. This includes a variety of steps from data audits to portability. Technology is a good thing. Technology can also be used to restrict the freedoms we enjoy in open, democratic societies. We see this happening in China, where people can be physically tracked everywhere they go and classified based upon their beliefs or ideas. We must shape the information environment rather than allowing it to shape us.
A partir de 1998 y durante una década, yo, el campesino y doctor Ariel Ruiz Urquiola, transité desde estudiante universitario hasta investigador y profesor en la Universidad de La Habana, en los tópicos de genética molecular y biología celular aplicados al manejo de las tortugas marinas en Cuba. Hice particular énfasis en la sostenibilidad de la pesquería legal del carey, porque Cuba era el único país del Atlántico que las capturaba estatalmente para vender las conchas de los carapachos a la empresa manufacturera del Japón, recibiendo millones de dólares como ganancia neta. Desde entonces trabajé con los pescadores legales e ilegales de este recurso marino para conocer los ardides con que se manejaba esta pesquería en Cuba. Entre los principales resultados de mi investigación estuvo demostrar que el agregado pesquero del sitio fundamental de captura legal en la costa atlántica del archipiélago de Cuba estaba genéticamente compuesto por careyes de diversas partes de anidación de la región del Caribe que migraban hacia sus áreas de reproducción, disminuyendo drásticamente la contribución de la principal colonia de anidación cubana en Jardines de la Reina en tan solo una década. Adicionalmente, el estudio biológico del Ministerio de la Pesca cubano sobre el manejo de este recurso marino estaba totalmente sesgado porque sus pescadores e investigadores eran incapaces de sexar los machos en estadios inmaduros, lo cual afectaría de forma contundente las estadísticas de las capturas en función de evaluar la sostenibilidad de la pesquería del carey. Peor aún fue conocer que la generalidad de las hembras del carey pescadas eran reclutas inmaduras o simplemente migraban a reproducirse por primera vez en sus áreas originales, y en su mayoría fuera de las playas cubanas de anidación, otro indicio de sobrepesca del recurso marino. Para rematar, el gran beneficiado de esta pesquería era el Ministerio de la Pesca cubano, mientras que los pescadores y las mujeres embarazadas, los ancianos y los niños, a donde debía destinarse la carne de este recurso pesquero, eran los blancos de la manipulación del régimen cubano para justificar ante CITES la pesquería legal de las tortugas marinas cubanas y la venta de las conchas del carey a Japón. Fue entonces que el gobierno cubano también ordenó frustrar la primera campaña de bien público para un recurso natural en Cuba, desarrollada por mi persona y una profesora de conjunto con estudiantes del Instituto de Diseño de Cuba, todo lo cual redundó en mi segunda expulsión de la Universidad de La Habana, que se trastocó al cese de mi investigación con tortugas marinas y cualquier otro recurso pesquero para condicionarme a dejar el Centro de Investigaciones Marinas de dicha universidad, obligándome a fumigar contra los mosquitos en la Municipalidad de Playa como premio a la defensa postergada de mi doctorado en Ciencias Biológicas. Mis reclamos seguían siendo de diversa índole, haciéndose poderosos los concernientes al estado malsano de la naturaleza del Parque Nacional Viñales y las condiciones de vida insostenibles de los asentamientos rurales. La destrucción de los bosques estaba bajo el amparo de la crianza de puercos asilvestrados, de las que aún se sirven los guardias rurales y otro tanto de campesinos ignorantes de los valores de la naturaleza insular. Y llegó la solución a todos mis reclamos fundamentados, la expulsión definitiva de mi persona del sector académico cubano. En medio de la nada, decidí rehacer mi vida profesional convirtiéndome en campesino usufructuario, el eslabón más bajo de la pirámide social cubana. Adquirí un terreno yermo en la Sierra del Infierno para reconvertirlo en una biogranja homónima. Inicié las bases para construir un vivero inteligente de caobas antillanas, destruido en 3 ocasiones por los puercos asilvestrados de matones bajo las órdenes de la policía política. El régimen revolucionario electrificó el asentamiento rural donde vivo y dio por electrificada mi casa falsamente en el 2017. Con malabares y gracias al pago de mis investigaciones por el Museo de Historia Natural de Berlín y la Universidad Humboldt, pude hacer mi propia instalación solar, cuyas baterías dejaron de funcionar misteriosamente un día después de regresar a Berlín para continuar mis estudios en el 2019. Planté, sembré varios cultivares tratando de preservar la diversidad genética de especies agrícolas ya raras en el archipiélago e hice cercas vivas. He tenido ayuda de mi familia y amigos en condiciones especiales. He criado ganado vacuno, pura raza para leche y carne, y diversas razas de animales para el tiro y el consumo. La policía política ordenó y ejecutó con sus matones el aniquilamiento de parte de mi ganado vacuno para evitar el cumplimiento de mi plan lechero y asesinó a mi ganado asnal para evitar el acarreo de los productos agropecuarios entre la montaña y el valle. También la destrucción de mis cultivares y plantaciones de cafeto, caña, plátano, frutales y viveros de caobas antillanas con la liberación de puercos asilvestrados. El Ministerio de la Agricultura tampoco me dejó convertirme en apicultor, a pesar de tener todo el conocimiento científico y tecnología alemana para, además de producir miel ecológica, también producir miel específica, polen, propóleo, cera y hacer un criadero de reinas. El Ministerio de la Agricultura, bajo las órdenes de la policía política, ha hecho todo lo posible por boicotear mi proyecto de biogranja único en el país. Al final, la policía rural me llevó a 1 año de prisión por hacer una cerca viva que delimitaba la periferia de mi finca, autorizada por el propio ministro de la Agricultura y bajo el cargo, autorizada por el propio Ministerio de la Agricultura y bajo el cargo de desacato. Después de una contundente solidaridad nacional e internacional de ciudadanos cívicos, científicos medioambientalistas y colegas alemanes, Amnistía Internacional, gobiernos y parlamentarios democráticos y mi prolongada huelga de hambre y de sed por 16 días, el desgobierno cubano me sacó de la prisión bajo una falsa licencia extrapenal que me obligaba a cumplir la sentencia en mi casa familiar de La Habana. Poco después de cumplir mi licencia extrapenal, participé en la primera demostración cívica en defensa de los derechos humanos de los gays en La Habana, donde fui detenido en una brutal operación de la policía política en contra de los manifestantes pacíficos. Cuando regresé a Alemania y Suiza en el 2019, descubrí que la dictadura cubana había usado una cepa mutagénica de HIV para reducirme en mi lucha pacífica por mis derechos ciudadanos violados y contra el daño a la naturaleza cubana. El 25 de junio del 2018 me inyectaban una solución concentrada de destroza, abusando de la fuerza policial y sin prescripción médica con el virus del HIV, en la sala de penados del Hospital Provincial de Pinar del Río, a la par que dejaban constancia en el mismo día que yo era un paciente HIV negativo con todo énfasis, sin preocuparse por otros virus y bacterias más comunes e infectivos entre humanos y población carcelaria, como los virus de la hepatitis B y la tuberculosis respectivamente. Los análisis ordenados en el Hospital Cantonal de Lucerna indicaban que había arribado a Europa con una infestación de HIV en fase crónica. El tipo y concentración de mis anticuerpos contra el HIV indicaban para los especialistas suizos que mi infección databa de más de 3 a 6 meses de contagio. Mi novio por 6 años, también médico suizo, el HIV negativo, y de conjunto a las poderosas evidencias científicas y de investigación pericial que reconstruyeron los hechos, indicaban que mi infectación había sido por vía sanguínea e intencional. Que la verdad de los cubanos de a pie se haga eco en los ciudadanos del mundo democrático para que la Cuba dictatorial de la familia Castro transite hacia una democracia por vías pacíficas y no siga cobrando más víctimas que se sumen a los millones que el comunismo ha provocado desde que se convirtió en doctrina ideológica de vagos y resentidos de poder. Muchas gracias.
Hello everybody, thank you for having me here today. My name is Ahmed Albasheer and I am the host of Albasheer Show, an Arabic language satirical news program. Our next season is in October, so be sure to tune in. I am from Iraq, a place that many of you have heard of because of things that we do not want to be known for. The theme of the Human Rights Forum this year is resilience. But we are resilient every year. So this is the Oslo Freedom Forum. This is interesting. I've never heard of this freedom or human rights for that matters. To tell you the truth, as a young boy, I really did not know what human rights were. I cared about listening to the Backstreet Boys without my father throwing out my tapes or smashing the tape player against my face. I wanted my history teacher to hit me on the palm rather than the back of my hand because that would have hurt much less. I also wanted a really cute bunk bed. I thought the top of it would protect me from IEDs or F-16s or B-52s or laser-guided missiles. Maybe those were human rights. The rights to the Backstreet Boys, the right to be hit on the palm, the right to have the bunk bed I wanted. But that isn't enough knowledge for me now. Right now, I'm just going to open and read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, since I don't know what it says. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. What? Seriously? The rights of every will be subjected to this is bullshit. Okay, after I'm done here, I'm going to call up some friends and tell them that we have these. I had no idea. I wonder if they know. But right now, sitting here, talking to you all, I'm feeling very inspired by this document. Since I want to tell you all about my home country, I have made a universal declaration of Iraqi human rights to let you know what we have in Iraq. Here they are. Number 1, Iraqis are born free, confined to their sect or religion. You're labeled, that's it. You have to live your whole life a certain way because of the sect or religion that you were born into. You spend your whole life defending something you didn't even choose. You fight and you die for it. Number 2, men have the right to do whatever they want to do. Number 3, women do not. Let's look at some examples. First, when you're a man harassing some woman, later on you can just blame it on her clothing. That short skirt shot me first. Those tight pants gave me the evil eye. It is completely logical then. Or, when a man rapes a woman, we see this as a problem, but we think a good solution is forcing them to marry. Right? Best of luck to the happy couple. And a man can beat his wife, his children, his sister, his female cousin, because he knows best. Men can do whatever they want, except if they open the car door for their wife. Then they're called a sheep. Number 4, you have the right to drive freely, no matter what. No driver license? No traffic lights? No problem. At intersections, it's you and your luck. You might die, it's fine. You have to find your own path through the traffic. It's beautiful, actually. It's just like finding your way through life. The exact same thing. Except in every intersection you have to redo the whole thing again. Isn't that even more beautiful? Number 5, do not kill, with 500 exceptions, like killings are okay if you have the right foreign backers, or if it's Sunday. Mondays are okay if it's hotter than 3 degrees. Tuesdays if you have a green camo uniform. Just kidding, the whole week is for them. If they sleep with your spouse, it's a crime to not kill them. If your child scores on the neighbor's kid during football, then the kid's father has the right to come kill you. And many other reasons. I'm not going to waste your time and read them now. But if you think of a reason, it's probably listed. And I'm sure all of you who are watching, you think you are very free. But in Iraq, we are actually even freer. We can do whatever we want to do. Someone cuts me off in the traffic, I'll just go ahead and kill them in the next intersection. Instant karma! You see, we're actually much more free than you all are. It's very obvious. It's like the Wild West out here. You guys have to work hard to do the same things, like become a cop in the US or something. That's just so much work. Number 6, you do not have the right to take an AK-47 and fire in the sky. Except weddings, when you're sad, the national team wins, the national team loses, the national team come home, the national team flies away, the national team sleep, when your child is circumcised. Any other circumstances? For fun. Yeah, so when you see someone firing a gun, you can't just assume that you know how they are feeling. There are so many possibilities. It's useful very often. As a tribe member, you can also shoot at the balcony. Only the balcony. No people. I mean it. Not a door, not a window, not a wall, not a child. Only the balcony. To tell another tribe to visit you at your house to resolve an argument. It's an amazing sign that you're finally ready to talk about it. Which brings us to number 7. You have the right to jump into an approaching car and injure yourself. Then you have the right to shoot at the driver's balcony to demand compensation. All Iraqis are insurance companies for each other. Number 8. As an Iraqi, you have the right to buy the battery in your TV remote if it's not working. This is what we do. When the battery in your remote control dies, you can just take it out. I bite it. And bite it. All over here. Don't touch this. Don't touch this. Only here. Only here. In the middle. Then put it back in and it works. This is an Iraqi life hack. I promise. You will need it one day. Number 9. A member of security forces has the right to close a street with thousands of cars in it just because he's upset. Sometimes he's just upset. He lost at his video game, or his wife yelled at him for smoking inside again. Just kidding. We all smoke inside. But he has the right to have his tantrum, and we have the right to sit in the traffic and wait for it to be over. Number 10, you have the right to express your opinion on anything, religion, politics, social life, anything between you and yourself. Number 11, you do not have the right to stop asking a married couple when they're going to have children. And you also have the right to keep suggesting random doctors to solve their problem. Because there's definitely a problem because they haven't had any children yet. Yes, these are almost all the rights that we have in Iraq. This is our universal declaration. To be honest, as a people, we never hear about human rights on the news. We only know it in the negative, the lack thereof. We never see them as a thing on their own. Human rights is always followed by abuse on TV here. We only know to look at the TV and think, oh, poor guy, at what goes on there. We grow up knowing only the feeling of pity or the feeling of revenge, of course. All of that just goes to show the resilience of the Iraqi people. They were promised the full human rights as part of a democracy, but these rights still have yet to come. Even though we've never heard nor seen these things called human rights, our people still go out day after day to protest for them. If you ask our government and the militias though, they'd say, of course we have human rights. How dare you suggest otherwise? Don't argue with us. We've got guns, okay? How could you even suggest that you can't express yourself freely? Everything is fine. You said all you wanted to say, right? Before we shot you. But I still learn the greatest lessons from the people around me in Iraq, whom I love very much, and who will one day see all their rights and their freedoms. And if anyone has a problem with what I've said, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. If you are looking for jokes, I can tell you I'm not funny. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I have acquired over a very long life in Iraq. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you do have a problem with what I've said, go now. It will be the end of it. I will not look for you. I will not pursue you. But if you do, I will look for you, and I will find you, and I will shoot at your balcony. Thank you again to the Oslo Freedom Forum for having me here with these wonderful speakers. It's a pleasure to have been with you all. Thank you. Good night.
Audrey Tang is Taiwan's digital minister in charge of social innovation, open government, and youth engagement. She is Taiwan's first transgender cabinet minister, and she became the youngest minister in the country's history at the age of 35. Audrey Tang is known for civic hacking and for strengthening democracy using technology. Audrey plays a key role in combating foreign disinformation campaigns and in formulating Taiwan's COVID-19 response. Audrey, it's a pleasure to have you with us again at an Oslo Freedom Forum event. And I'd like to start off by asking you, as digital minister, you work closely with civil society and you encourage them to contribute to and to participate in Taiwan's democracy. Technology's played a very important role, and Taiwan's digital democracy has grabbed the world's attention, especially in the January 2020 elections in Taiwan. How does technology, along with open governance, along with transparency, protect democracy and help push back against foreign influence campaigns?
Thank you for the great question. In Taiwan, we managed to counter the pandemic with no lockdown and the infodemic with no takedown, thanks to digital democracy. In the digital social innovation, we have three pillars, and that's fast, fair, and fun. On the fast part, we ensure that anybody who detects a disinformation online, even on end-to-end encrypted channels, they can flag it not to the authorities, but rather to professional journalists as well as civic technologists running a crowdsourced fact-checking project that anyone can join. And then once this gets detected, for example, last December, when Dr. Li Wenliang's whistleblowing gets upvoted this way on the public forum PTT, we decided that it was not disinformation after all, because it looks very legit. And then the medical officers immediately took the quote, 7 new SARS cases, unquote, to heart, and then started a health inspection for all flight passengers coming in from Wuhan the very next day, which is the first day of 2020. And so the collective intelligence not only enables a fast response from the Central Epidemic Command Center that live streams the responses every day, but also through toll-free lines like 1922 and chatbots, any new ideas coming in from civil society, for example, a boy who calls and says, oh, you're rationing mask, but all I get is pink medical mask, I don't want to wear it to school because I'm afraid my classmate may laugh at me. The very next day in a live stream, everybody, the medical officers and the minister wore pink medical masks to show solidarity and gender mainstreaming. And so in this way, our counter-infodemic response, the humor over rumor, emphasizes that for each disinformation campaign that travels on outrage, we always push out a meme that travels on joy. And joy has a higher R value than outrage. And so we can ensure that people get vaccinated, that is to say, to see something hilarious before they actually see the disinformation package, and therefore will not share it in act of outrage. The foreign interference, for example, on attacking our election systems is countered this way, also through radical transparency of the YouTubers literally live streaming the counting process in the ballot boxes, and a disinformation about mask distribution is countered through a radical transparency effort done by civic technologists. The people queuing in line in the pharmacies can swipe their national health insurance card and actually see that the map reflects every 30 seconds the real-time availability in that pharmacy and so on. And so by radically trusted citizens, we counter both the infodemic and the pandemic through building mutual trust.
Well, that's both inspiring and I just wish that this could be adopted pretty much everywhere. I think you are very advanced in comparison to where other democracies are, and I really hope that other governments look to your government as both a source of inspiration and support in the struggle against foreign influence campaigns that can really be so damaging. We see this a lot with human rights defenders and what they have to deal with through either troll farms or bots. I want to go to an article from the Hong Kong Free Press from June 2020. You mentioned that, quote, you think the pandemic served as an amplifier of two different governing models. Clearly, you're making a reference to the stark and dramatic contrast between authoritarian dictatorship model and the free and open democratic society model. Why do you think that Taiwan's democratic system has not only flourished, but has also strengthened during this COVID-19 pandemic?
In Taiwan, we do not make the false trade-off or dilemma between having to sacrifice economic growth in order to counter the pandemic, or that in order to make sure that everybody still enjoys the freedom of doing business and movement and so on, we have to make sacrifices in terms of public health, right? The Taiwan's record on both the counter-pandemic and also recording GDP growth this year has been the top of the world. And so by showing people that instead of the government knows everything, we instead say in Mandarin, 请你来, if you can do it, do it. The idea, very simply put, is that the economic sector as well as the social sector can call the shots when they see, for example, a better way of distributing a mask, first in the pharmacies, then in convenience stores through mobile apps, and then on kiosk and even vending machines and so on. And the government, far from dictating anything, takes actively the piloted ideas and then just amplifies it through the support of real-time open API and open data. This is what I refer to as reverse procurement. That is to say, whenever a new idea gains legitimacy through democracy, the government, even though it may resist that at first, for example, using traditional rice cookers and do not add water, and then you can disinfect the mask and reuse it for 3 to 5 times. This is very counterintuitive. But then after we actually confirm it in our Food and Drug Administration, our CECC Commander, Minister Chen Shizhong, actually demonstrated this procedure on a live stream conference. And later on, we from international academic journals that it works for N95 too. And this essentially tripled our mask availability just by sharing this simple social innovation. And all this imbues into the civil society this idea that innovation does not need to originate from top down. It can come from grassroots, and that's the core of democracy.
Again, incredibly inspiring. Rice cookers, that's awesome. I had heard about using an oven and doing a low temperature, but rice cooker, that's terrific. I'm gonna start looking into that. You played a key role in leading the effort of your country's government in combating COVID-19. And as you keep mentioning, technology was a key component of this. What were some of your primary concerns when leading this effort, and how did you incorporate protections for privacy and individual freedoms into this plan? Has there been any tension between citizens' concern over, say, surveillance or contact tracing or just general rights concerns and the government's use of big data to fight the epidemic, the pandemic rather?
In Taiwan, because we never declared either a lockdown or a state of emergency, all our administrative actions need to go through the oversight from the parliamentarians, including interpellations, public hearings, and such. And because of this constitutional restriction, we only make use of the data collection method already in place before the pandemic. We do not, as a rule, collect new data in the name of the counter-pandemic effort. And this serves a very good bridge into the civil society, human rights organizations' understanding. Because if we repurpose something that's already in place before the pandemic, its privacy properties are more well understood. For example, when we do the mask rationing, it's essentially the same procedure as receiving recurring prescriptions from the pharmacies. When we collect those in the kiosk, it's essentially the same experience as filing your income or local taxes in the convenience store. For example, the digital quarantine, where the phone, instead of asking people to install anything that communicates over Bluetooth or collects GPS data or Wi-Fi or anything like that. Instead, we use a very rough estimate of the position of the phone using cell phone tower signal strength that we are already using for early earthquake and flood warnings anyway. And so by reusing mechanisms that's already in place, we make sure that the human rights organizations can better communicate with the CECC, the command center. And the approval rate, for example, about the CECC's digital quarantine measures was at 91%. And we thank the 9% for asking the MPs for us to have to do an interpellation and explanation session, after which the polls show approval rate grows to 94%. And of course, we thank the 6% for keeping us honest and accountable.
It's really wonderful to hear someone in government say, keep us honest and accountable. Again, it's very inspiring. And, you know, at the Oslo Freedom Forum, in past Oslo Freedom Forums, and actually already in this one, we've had several speakers discuss how Chinese tech companies could threaten the digital rights and human rights of users. And I'm going to quote again from an article in the Nikkei Asian Review, where you were quoted as saying, putting Chinese equipment in a country's core telecom infrastructure is akin to inviting a Trojan horse into the network. Would you kindly elaborate a little bit more on this? What are some of the recommendations that you would provide to governments and to private citizens on this front, around the subject?
The Trojan horse metaphor, I did not create that. I was merely relaying the consensus on the street when we occupied the parliament back in 2014. It's called the Sunflower Movement. At that time, the students and people who are concerned about the so-called cross-strait service and trade agreement occupied the parliament for 3 weeks, and each MPO in one corner of the occupied parliament deliberated on the street one particular aspect each of the CSSTA. And one of the deliberations there was about core communication infrastructure components made in the PRC, that's People's Republic of China regime, in the 4G communication network. So that Trojan horse metaphor was not coined because of 5G. Rather, it was coined 6 years ago for the 4G deployment. And the consensus on the street was that the overall total cost of ownership of having to reevaluate whether a supplier has been taken over by the Dang, the Chinese Communist Party, through one of its embedded party branches in every large enterprises in the PRC jurisdiction is too high. Because if you choose any particular component for your 4G network, it's likely that for 5G and other extended long-time evolution networks, you will be using components from the same suppliers as well. And so for each and every upgrade, you have to do another systemic risk assessment of whether it has been de facto taken over by the Chinese Communist Party. And so amortized is actually more expensive than using, say, Nokia or Ericsson components. And so the decision on the street and also in the National Communication Commission was made back then, 6 years ago. And so we've been enjoying so-called clean path in our 4G network and now 5G this year with no PRC components, and we're thriving. So obviously, I think this is a consensus regardless of party affiliations in the Taiwan public.
That's spectacular. You mentioned the Sunflower Movement. Now, this is correct me if I'm wrong, the March 2014 Sunflower Movement. And this was when hundreds of people demonstrated against a trade deal with the CCP in China due to concerns of increasing China's authoritarian influence in a young, democratic, sovereign, free nation like Taiwan. Given your activist roots, what advice or what tips, suggestions do you have for activists, specifically those activists that are pushing back against authoritarianism?
As Buckminster Fuller have said, the best way when you see a broken system is not exactly to try to repair the system. Instead, innovate, think of a new system that renders the old one obsolete. Indeed, in the Sunflower Movement, we have seen a police-centered, maybe 20 different NGOs, each have their own center, and with horizontal connection enabled by the internet. Later on, we will see a very similar configuration in the umbrella movement in Hong Kong. Now, fast forward a few years, in the anti-ELAB protest, instead of 20 centers, we're now seeing maybe 2,000 centers. Each and every single person can start a flash mob or to compose Make Glory to Hong Kong together with a essentially adhocracy on LIHKG and other connected places. And these give people a taste of what it feels like to live democracy day to day. It's not just uploading 3 bits every 4 years to a ballot box, which is called voting, still very important. But far more interesting and important is to co-create reasonable things, solutions, decisions that we can all live with. And people who participate in this kind of co-creation, their minds gets changed, that whenever people feel anger, they no longer turn the anger into helplessness, but rather into social outrage, which is an impulse for co-creation. And so my main suggestion is to not take this personal, but take it social.
That's, I think one word we could add to that is hope, which is the opposite of helplessness. And if I could, you just mentioned Hong Kong. The people of Hong Kong look to Taiwan as an inspiration due to Taiwan's own history of transitioning to democracy after having been an authoritarian country, which is often a reminder to people who have this silly idea that a country like, for instance, China under the CCP must remain a dictatorship because they're built that way. Yet, in fact, Taiwan proves that you can make that shift. And Hong Kong is in a precarious situation. What do you think are some of the other lessons, especially regarding digital democracy and innovation, that Hong Kongers can learn from the Taiwanese, and vice versa, maybe as by the same token, in terms of hope and helplessness, what have the Taiwanese learned from Hong Kongers?
Well, in terms of the quote, be water, unquote, leaderless form, or, well, more than 2,000 leaders, so it's not very countable anyway, might as well be leaderless form of social organization. I think anywhere from Taiwan to Barcelona to everywhere in the world is learning from Hong Kong. They are definitely at the forefront of this be form of activism, compared to which the sunflower is but a seed, a prototype. So we are all learning from Hong Kong. And also in the early days of Taiwan's young democracy, as you mentioned, when we just lifted the martial law in the 80s, we rely in large part on the freedom of the press, especially international correspondents, journalists, and so on in Hong Kong, to help working out what we have not learned because of systemic authoritarianism in the dictatorship era in Taiwan. And so that greatly sped up Taiwan's democratic activists' outreach to the world through the help from the journalists and activists in Hong Kong. And so we have been, I guess, returning the favor in the past few years when Reporter Without Borders moved their headquarters to Taipei, when the Oslo Freedom Forum sets up physically in Taipei, and many other events such as these as well. We made sure that the Hong Kong people can safely in Taiwan not only share their experience, but also, as you mentioned, radiate a message of hope that if the liberal democratic countries all keep our eyes, a watchful coalition on the Hong Kong situation, then it will not deteriorate, it will not suffer because of neglect. And that role Taiwan's very much willing to play, in addition to offer, for example, student exchange and safety programs and so on. We have a special office for this.
Well, if we can take a view, if we can scope out from Hong Kong and Taiwan and talk about other liberal democracies, how do you think they can better adapt to the rise of authoritarianism?
Yeah, I think we need not only to play defensive here, but also aggressively make sure that the innovations, what we call the Taiwan model, that you can take care of the economic growth without restricting essential freedoms. That is a very powerful message to share and exchange with the world. Recently, the Czech Republic's head of the Senate visited Taiwan and declared that, and I quote, I am Taiwanese, unquote, paying kind of homage to the Ich bin ein Berliner quite a few decades ago, because they also agree with this message, right? The message that with the proper co-creation across sectors in a society, we do not have to polarize or divide among ourselves just because we're a liberal democracy. Rather, we can ensure that everybody plays a role in the social mobilization against the pandemic and also the infodemic. And so that is the main message that we want to send. And for more, consult Taiwan Can Help us.
Wow. Audrey, this has been superb. You really have. We packed so much into this fireside chat. I hope that the next time we meet, it'll be next to a real fire somewhere in Norway, or when we do the next regional Oslo Freedom Forum in Taiwan. So thank you so much, Audrey Tang. Thank you so much. We are great admirers of the role you play, and we will continue to sing the praises of a government that truly understands individual rights and not only stands for human rights in Taiwan and fundamental freedoms, but for these throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.
Love it. Love it. Thank you.
Cool. Wonderful.
Okay, well, no, that was just the rehearsal, right? We're going to do it again. We're going to do it again, right?
Yeah, that was dress rehearsal, right?
We've come to the end of the first day of the 2020 Oslo Freedom Forum. And what a remarkable and inspiring day it has been. From Gulchehra, we heard about the ongoing genocide of the Uyghur people in Western China. From Professor Christopher Balding, it was explained how the Chinese government is using our data to spy on us. Thanathorn inspired us to advocate for freedom in Thailand. And Mohamed Nagi showed us that democratic change is possible in Sudan. We've learned about the challenges faced by Cubans from Ariel, and what the future of our democracies might look like in the digital age from Minister Audrey Tang from the nation of Taiwan. This year's theme is resilience, and these and all of our guests today have led the way in the struggle for freedom. Resilient in the face of tyrannical regimes bolstered by a global pandemic. We're grateful for their passion and dedication in striving to make the world better, more free, and more prosperous for all of us. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending the 2020 Oslo Freedom Forum, and I very much look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Till then.